Hello! We have got Chris in the studio today, a friend of another Chris, Christopher Brady, who was on recently talking about how he went and interviewed serial killers. And Chris has done something similar, including with Ian Brady, the Moors murderer. So it is going to get dark. It is going to get graphic. And before we go there, though, thank you very much for coming on, Chris. Do you want to tell us a bit about your background and what qualifies you to write about killers?
Yeah, my background was I was brought up in care. I was born into a Jesuit orphanage, left there by my mother, who was a schoolgirl. They tracked her down and she signed me over to them. So I grew up in...
Your mum was a schoolgirl?
She was a 13-year-old schoolgirl.
Good grief.
I know, it's pretty back then as well. Don't ask me what year, but, a long time ago. And so... I grew up in a Catholic children's home and I was adopted at age 4 and I went to live in Hayes with the Harts, and my real name was Tracy Mary Sweeney, and they didn't keep my real name. They changed it to Christine Joan Hart, and I lived with them. My adoptive father was sexually abusive to me, and that went on until I hit puberty. And my mother was violent. She used to make me lie face down on the bed and whip me. All the backs of my legs were, in a pretty bad way. I stayed off school quite a lot. And then when I got to puberty, for some reason, they were quite strict with me. They wouldn't let me go out. I went out one night and stayed out with a friend, came back, and they had a social worker waiting for me and basically shipped me off to care, and which was quite scary because I was told by people, as soon as you get into the care home, you've got to have a fight. And the social worker took me to a place called Middlesex Lodge, and it was a bookstore, and he said you might get put in there because there's no care homes right now. And eventually I found myself at a place called Bedwell Gardens first. I was in there for quite some time, and then I was moved to Olympic House and spent my teenage years in care, which, was quite interesting. I'd been quite sheltered. I went to an all-girls grammar school and, was quite posh and sheltered. And the kids in there were Borstal boys, and the girls were quite rough. I was lucky, though. There was a gypsy girl who lived there, and as soon as I got there, she said that she would protect me, and she did. So I ended up enjoying it, really. And then when it came to 18, I was told that I would have to leave and go to a homeless hostel and sign on the dole. And that was pretty awful. There was a student that came to our home whose father had a detective agency, and he asked some of the kids, would they like to interview for the job? And it was basically tracing missing people, surveillance, that kind of thing. And my boyfriend at the time, Trevor, he got an interview. I had an interview and I got the job. He wasn't that pleased. He said it's like Ronnie Biggs getting a job as a copper. But I started doing that. And then at the kids' home, they said I would be better off if I lived back with my parents again, which was quite odd. But I decided to go back. So I went back to live with them and then went to work every day as a private investigator.
Wow, that was quite a unexpectedly harrowing introduction. And people got to be moved by what you've been through, because it's a reoccurring theme on this channel. We started out primarily interviewing people who've been in prison, and the childhood trauma and the abuse and paedophilia just seem to be coming up time and time again. And then the person doesn't have the tools to deal with it, so they end up on drugs, self-medicating, which leads to crime. Prostitution for women, drug dealing for men, typically. and it starts out and then it just escalates into heavier and heavier crime. But it seems like you were on that cycle, but managed to avoid the heavier stuff coming out of the abuse. You managed to go into this positive trajectory. So what made you different then from people who get onto drugs and things like that?
My friends were all taking drugs and heroin and the hard stuff, and I hung out with a really rough crowd, but I just didn't like it. I took some dope and it made me really, really paranoid. I think it was the effect it had on me that I didn't like it. I would drink, I would sniff glue. I was arrested by the cops. I would do things like go up to cops, say, "Oh, nick me," and start kicking the side of their car and climbing on the top of a police car and saying, "Come and nick me, guys," and throwing bottles at them. So I did find myself in a prison cell, now and again. And it did shock me. And I thought, where's my life going? I was this girl at grammar school and, my parents had, pushed me in the direction, back into care. I didn't need to go back into care around that time. It was pretty harsh. And I think it was guilt because of what they'd done and they were worried about me telling. And some of the staff at the kids' home, they did point it out and they were saying things and they were kind of revealing my parents and they wanted to stay hidden. They were Catholic and it was all very respectable and linked to the church. And my father's sister was a nun with the Daughters of St. Paul, and she had taken me under her wing. I went to Boston to become a nun with her. That didn't work out, so I came back again. So I had that tie to the church as well that kept me a little bit on the straight and narrow. I would go to church very often with her, and I had that strong need for God, and that kind of thing. So I suppose that kept me. Probably, or maybe it was just that drugs made me paranoid because a lot of my friends were on it. Some of my friends went into prostitution, ended up in prison. There was a boy who hung himself because he was raped by the social workers. Yeah, so much. And it's all because the social workers in the children's homes, we girls used to try and seduce them. They would come on duty, we would sit on their knee, try and kiss them, and they wouldn't be interested. They'd be interested in the boys, which was quite horrible.
Well, we interviewed a guy called Darren Jeffries, and the title of his podcast was Gang Raped by Social Services, and it's like everywhere he went, therapist room or whatever, they were pimping out the kids.
It was the boys that suffered more. Strange, isn't it? And it really ruined a lot of them, because he didn't know. I remember talking to a boy at Hampton. He said, "I think I enjoyed it and I feel I want to die now because I enjoyed it." And I was saying, "Look, this is what happened to you. It's not in you, but it still affects him to this day."
Yeah.
But, it's awful what goes on. And I think these people that go into working in these care homes, they do for that very reason.
Just like you got people joining the Catholic priesthood because they know that they'll get the best lawyers for them when they get caught committing paedophilia, and they'll just move them around and there won't be any repercussions.
Yeah. I know I was listening to Putin said something about the West being full of paedophiles. I think he said it today. And I think the Roman Catholic Church, because I remember ringing the Crusades of Rescue and saying, you put me with paedophiles. He was a paedophile, didn't you know? My adoptive mother was, violent to me. And you could see they were very childish people and they were actually cousins, so didn't they look into them at all? And the woman that answered the phone the first time I rang many years back now, she said to me, "There's quite a few people of your age that ring in to say that happened to them." So I don't know. I mean, were they doing it deliberately? Makes you think, doesn't it?
It seems like there's an epidemic of it in the church, and we're doing a documentary on Jimmy Savile right now, 4-hour documentary. It just seems to be particularly prevalent during that period of time. It seems that there was a lot less taboo around things and people could get away with things that they can't get away with now. So fortunately things have changed, but the victims, it's with them for the rest of their lives, isn't it? The pain and the suffering.
I know, you don't ever really get over it. It affects you sexually. Obviously, I've got a lot of blocks there and, I never married because of it. And, it does It just, I said to someone the other day, it's like they might as well kill you,
Yeah.
because.
All right. So we left off then. You said that you joined a private detective agency in London at age 18. Your colleagues were ex-MI5, ex-military. And because you were a young girl, you were able to do surveillance work and get away on notice doing that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they used you to get close to some of the men that they were spying on. Is that the case?
Yeah, I was used to cozy up to people if they thought somebody, was up to stuff and they wanted to spy on them. It was for many different reasons. For instance, there was a filmmaker over from South Africa who was doing stuff on the government that the government didn't like. So this agency wanted to put a tail on him and someone to get close to him. So it was that kind of thing where you would just, cozy up or go along undercover or become an employee of a firm that they wanted to spy on and just work there and report on what people were doing.
And you got taught how to trace missing people and to follow cars without being noticed. What techniques did they teach you for
the
those?
Boring stuff. I mean, my driving isn't that great. So, I would often be sitting in a car with somebody else who was pretty, the ex-army guys are really good at driving. My driving is not that great. But I would be sitting there, on surveillances, which are quite boring. You're sitting there for hours.
Yeah.
Just taking pictures, and I still do surveillance. I still work as an investigator. So
yeah,
but I don't like it. I'd rather be doing something else.
Really? So what age were you then when you felt inclined to be interested in the Moors murderer Ian Brady?
Well, that happened around age 13. And
age 13?
Yeah, it was when I'd gone into care and I was interested in tracking down my real parents. And I was given just this tiniest bit of information from the Crusades of Rescue, the Catholic Children's Society. There was a whole file, but they said, it's your mother's business. It's not your business. It was pretty harsh. They told me that my real father was a criminal. And so I thought around that time, it was very hard for me to stomach adoption. I had just felt that, why didn't her family take me in? Why do you have to be dumped somewhere? And I kind of wanted a reason. And when they said, oh, your real father's a criminal, I latched onto it a lot because I thought, that's the perfect excuse, isn't it? If, I'm bad blood or something.
Yeah.
And so I went to the true crime section of the library looking through, and, I read lots of books on Matt Vicker, the other guy, oh gosh, I can't remember his name, the one that hung out with Matt Vicker, who's written a lot of books. Wally Probin, his books. And I used to haunt the true crime section. And it was one time I came across a book on the Moors case. It was Beyond Belief. And I thought, wow, what if he was my father? That would be interesting because my mother had come from Manchester. And it kind of just crossed my mind. But I remember taking the book out, reading it, and just becoming hugely interested in the way it was written. I'd come across evil with my adoptive father sexually abusing me, and in the church because I'd sat and meditated with the priests and with my Aunt Kathleen, and I was interested in the way evil was portrayed in Beyond Belief, and that it portrayed Brady as not only being involved in black magic, that he had somehow special powers to come out of his body. It's an interesting book, and it's written by a man who is, so they say, Emily Williams, an occultist. And I found it interesting. However, I did then find out later it has absolutely nothing to do with the Moors case or Brady. It's more or less a novel, beautifully written and a fascinating book, but nothing to do with reality.
So we have a big American audience then. Could you just explain to them who Ian Brady was and what happened with the Moors case?
Yeah, he murdered 5 children. He raped them first. He buried them on moorland, the Yorkshire moors, and 2 of the children couldn't be found. He also murdered a 16-year-old Pauline Reed and then a 17-year-old Edward Evans when he invited Edward Evans back to his house with Myra Hindley, his girlfriend, and proceeded to chop him up more or less with an axe. I mean, they're just absolutely horrific murders. Absolutely horrific. And then you look at Brady, and I remember thinking, maybe it was the influence of the book, but I remember thinking, is there something else involved there? Is there some kind of... It just felt that there was black magic involved. There was some kind of... Brady was 25 years of age. And I just felt like investigating the case for some reason. And so I did. And I wrote to him a couple of letters. He was in Wormwood Scrubs. And I was young. I was 13 at that point. And sometimes me and my friends would ring up Wormwood Scrubs and talk to the warders and say, you know, what's going on there. I passionately at the time wanted to become a psychiatrist because, again, my adoptive parents took me when I was very young to, my father used to take me with him to Dublin, and he took me to St Brendan's. I think it's St Brendan's. It's an asylum in Dublin, and his brother was in there, and it's this massive old-fashioned asylum, and it was just terrifying for me as a young girl to go and sit there, and there were people clucking like chickens and banging their head against the wall, and I saw a guy in a white coat. And I went to talk to him, and he was really kind. I sat in his office, and I thought, that's what I want to be. I want to be a psychiatrist. So I had this passion to do it. And at school, when I went into care, they started saying, you know, you're not coming into school. I wasn't coming into school. I was hanging out with the other kids. And basically my O-levels went for a Burton. And then they said, you're not going to be a psychiatrist. You're not going to be anything. You're just going to end up in prison. So I ended up quite bitter. And I think a part of me thought that I would get to Brady and get inside his head and find out what really went on. It was just this like interest.
You mentioned that Brady had a girlfriend, Myra Hindley. What was her involvement in the Moors murders?
I'm not sure. I think, people say that, she just drove in places and he took these poor, unfortunate children off for walks into the darkness on the Yorkshire moors. Other people say that she was present. I would be with the second and say she was present and she went along with it, and that they were folie à deux, as they call it. They call it shared madness.
What about recordings of the atrocities they committed? What were in those recordings?
They taped Leslie Ann Downey and recorded her screaming and recorded Christmas carols and really awful, and took photographs. They're the most horrific crimes ever, I think.
So you were wondering whether there was an occult element to this, and then you decided to write to and visit Brady when you were 21. It
was quite slow as it went. I had started writing, didn't get a reply. He was then moved to Park Lane, which is an asylum, and I saw it in the newspapers. There was a headline, Brady after 25 years or something, and he was moved. And I remember I was on the top deck of a bus, and I thought, oh, that's that Brady. And I thought, I know, I'll just bang off a letter. And I got a response which quite shocked me. It's hard to think that someone like that actually exists. So I was like, what? And I was dating a guy at the time, Ray. We were engaged, and he, I took the letter to him, and he was like, wow, it's so interesting. You're going to write back. So we sat together and compiled a little rejoinder. And next thing, he said, come up to meet me. And I was in two minds. I thought, should I? My boyfriend said, don't go. It's crazy. But I was in a certain position that I was working as a private investigator. I didn't like the work. It's not for somebody with a brain. And I felt that I still wanted to be a psychiatrist. And I felt that, arrogant or not, perhaps it's arrogant of me to think that I could find out where, people that had studied hadn't worked out why he'd done it. And I thought to myself that I would be the one that would uncover. I rather thought, I think when you're abused as a child and you have that trauma, I think you can be a victim of not growing up, of being immature, and of having a certain amount of magical thinking where you think, oh, this is, I've got a letter here, this has come to me, this is meant to be, I'm going to be the one, I'm going to be so famous, I'm going to write an amazing book, and my life won't be a car crash. I mean, at the time I felt it was a car crash. I was pretty clever at school. I was, my friends had gone off to Oxford and Cambridge. One of them's now a professor at Southampton University. And I was, pretty much, in a bad way. Even the boyfriend I was dating, he was pretty rough. I knew that he was like, into crime, and I knew my life wasn't normal. It was out of kilter. I was going and working in these agencies. They were using me for rubbish work, and I was dating Ray, and I did love him, but he wasn't really for me. He was, I was dating him, I think maybe, I don't know, he was a tough guy, and, I had that protection that I feared. And so I thought, well, life has offered me this. I'm going to go along and I'm going to find out all his secrets off of him. This is my idea.
Can you take us into that visit then? Can you just set the table and describe what it was like to go in there and sitting down with him, the atmosphere, what he was like, encountering him?
Yeah, well, that very first time, I visited him 3 times and spaced out. And the very first time you get searched, I had, I think, white cowboy boots, or no, I didn't have, that was the second time. I had like a business suit, and a little bit like you're wearing. I thought, well, I'll dress like I'm a professional doctor, whatever. And so a business suit, went there, gave my name. They said, who are you coming to visit? I thought they'd know. And so I had to say Ian Brady, and they give me like the filthiest of looks. And I began to think I was a little bit out of my league, actually, because I was very young, and I thought this is like too much. So I went in, and they showed me down to his room. The nurse showed me down to his room. I looked in. He was kind of sitting facing out. He has a window, and it's reinforced, obviously. And then they said, oh, let's go straight down to the visiting room. So I kind of backed up. Then they called him out, and I followed him down the corridor into this room. It's about this size. And I sat, I suppose, like we are now, really. And I felt a little bit out of my league. I felt overwhelmed. I felt that he was maybe more intellectual than me. And he was looking at me as if, who the hell are you, and what do you actually want? And, in that way that when people are paranoid, and I started to swear and feel, totally out my league. And so I thought, I'll just come on like a journalist. At that time, I hadn't met any journalists, but, I knew I'd seen them on TV. So I started questioning him, do you like it here? Do you ever think about your crimes? And it basically went like a journalist would, seeing him. And I got up at the end of it. I saw him go over to one of his cronies, this kind of guy who looked a bit scary, and say, oh, what do you think of her over there? And then he came back over, sort of looked at me weirdly, walked off down the corridor back into his room. And I was still waiting there for the staff to take me out. And then I was looking down at his room, and then he came out. and sort of saw me and must have thought, oh, she should be gone by now, and then walked kind of past me and then back again, which was all quite weird. And then a nurse took me out and said, oh, your letters are really interesting. And I said, oh, how do you mean? And the nurse, it was a male nurse, and he said, well, you write about life and why we're here, and he finds your letters very interesting. And the nurse said, oh, I find your letters really interesting too. And I'm like, oh, and I just felt really overwhelmed. I just thought, I really feel that I shouldn't be here, and I'm not going to write letters like that again, because it's, he's a real person. In my mind, it was someone in a book, and I don't really want to play at being pretend psychiatrist anymore. I felt very overwhelmed, and I went home, and Brady sent me a letter saying, it's obvious you're a tabloid journalist, and you played a very fly trick this afternoon on me. You're a journalist. Which paper do you work for? I know it was a really angry letter. And this was around the point when he was going back up on the moors to look for the missing graves. So he was in the newspapers every single day. And one day I was around my boyfriend's house, Ray, and I was looking through the Sunday People, and there was an article about Brady has been visited by a mystery blonde. And who is the mystery blonde? He's fascinated by her. And I said to Ray, oh, that's really weird, isn't it? This blonde. And he went, it's you stupid bitch. And I'm like, it can't be me. Because, when you're working class, you don't think newspapers are going to write about you. And I thought, that can't possibly be me. And I phoned another private detective called Alan, and I said, Alan, have you seen the Sunday People today? I think that's me, but I'm not sure. And he said, well, why don't you go up to Scotland? And he had some friends up there, and he said, go up to Scotland and stay up there with my friends. So I remember packing my stuff and getting dressed up, beige jumper, and I had a gold bracelet, and I was all ready to go off on the train. And I got a phone call at my mother's house, and it was Alan, and he said, come and meet me. And I said, why? You told me to go to Scotland and I'm meeting your friends up there. And he said, no, just come for a drink. And it was in Ealing, a detective agency there where he worked. And so I went along, and as soon as I went, there were these two guys in the pub, and I said, who are they? And he said, look, it's best you talk to them. And it was the Sunday People. And he had set me up with them. So I disappeared. I just ran, got on a bus. They followed me and came back to my house. And they were saying, oh, Alan's told us you thought he was your father. And I said, no, that was something like years and years ago. And it was just like a quick thought. And obviously it's a kid and a kid's home. It's not true. How could it possibly be if you think, it's not going to be. And that was Phil Hall and Ted Hines. And they brought me back to the offices, the Sunday People offices. And then they took me to a hotel in Swiss Cottage and gave me some drink, gave me some vodka, said, calm down, and said, well, why were you writing to Brady? And I said, well, I was just interested. And they said, well, we like this story about you being his daughter. So you can, I know it's pretty bad. So you can have a choice. You can either be the new Myra Hindley, because you look like her anyway, and I didn't, or you can be his daughter. Which one? Do you want to be a silly tart that writes to him, the new Myra Hindley, or the daughter? And I was crying. I was really upset. I rang Alan, who had sold me. I found out later he got paid £5,000. They never offered me a penny for my story. Didn't ever give me anything for the front page. They said to me, we're going to fly you up to see Brady. And I said, well, I don't really want to go and see him, because after I'd got this angry letter, I talked it over with Ray, and we said, I've just been it, there's nothing there. He's, pretty serious dude, really, pretty intense, just, So I decided not to correspond anymore. And so the idea of going up to see him again, it really didn't appeal. And especially they said, you've got to go in there, show him your birth certificate, which I got, a birth certificate in my handbag, show him that where it says name of father, and say you thought it was him, and say, are you my dad? And I'm like, why would I do something like that? But I cried and cried, and I had the choice of being a stupid tart who writes to him or go ahead and do this. So they took me to a studio and they dressed me up, lots of red lipstick. They coiffed my hair and put a gold top, took pictures of me. And it's not how I normally dress. I was, a bit of a tomboy. And they took me up. We went on a flight actually from London to Liverpool and went in to see Brady again, which, sort of forced to go in and see him. I got there and it was late. I got there at 5 minutes to 4 and the visiting hours ended at 4. And the guy said, you can't come in. And I said, no. I said, look, it's 5 more minutes there. And he gave me the filthiest look. And I remember I had white cowboy boots and they searched them. And I was tarted up to the nines from this photo shoot. And I went in, saw Brady from a distance, clutching a plate because it must have been their feeding time. And he went into the room. And I said, apologies for turning up like this. Apologies. It's late as well. And he said, well, what do you want? And I said, and he sits in a weird way, he was always smoking and he'd like sit to the side and look and say, what do you want, like that? And you'd be like, had to say something. And I said, the press have got hold of me for visiting you and I don't really know what to do. I thought, can I come out with what they want me to? No, I just couldn't. It would seem bizarre. And he's not someone to sort of, arse around with. And I had the cutting about the mystery blonde. And I said, look, this is in the newspaper. And he snatched it off me and he said, can I keep this? And he sort of held it like that. And I remember thinking, well, no, I want to keep that. And I sort of went, and he just held it. And I said, no, okay, you keep that. And they said the guy sitting, because he had visitors, visitors had to have a guard at that point. It was only the third visit that didn't. And he said to me, keep away from the press. So I'm like, oh, okay, then fine. Thank you. And they were waiting outside. It's quite amusing. And then I went outside and immediately Phil Hall said, what did he say? What did he say? Did he admit he was your father? And I said, can I tell you when I get back to the hotel? And I was trying to think, what am I going to say to just get them, to do something, to maybe forget the whole thing. And they made me walk up and down outside Park Lane and take pictures, and they weren't getting the right shot. So I was so tired because I hadn't slept the night before, but they're just making me walk up and down to take these shots of me. And I've actually got one of those shots now. I look so angry in the shot. And then we flew back to Swiss Cottage. We were in a hotel back there. I said I wanted a drink. They gave me a lot of vodka and they said, did you ask him? And I said, yeah, I asked him. And he said, oh, I've no idea what that's about and don't know your mother and no, never had a child. And they were like, you're kidding. You didn't ask him, did you? And I'm like, no. And they said, okay, well, you're on the TV. Do you want to see yourself? And I couldn't believe it because I thought, why would I be on the TV? Because now that it's a non-story. And, I've become a journalist since then. And if I had been in that position, I don't think I would have done what they did. So they turned on the TV and there was a picture of me all glammed up and next to a picture of Brady. And it said, my life with Ian Brady or something. I mean, it was just total rubbish. It was really bad. And I thought, what life with Ian Brady? There wasn't. I'd gone to see him. It was a mistake. And that was that, really. And I phoned Alan, and I was crying and crying and really upset. And I said, I don't know what to do. I'm really scared. They're going to say I'm his daughter, or possibly his daughter. And Alan said, tell them that you want to be taken out of the country because you're too scared. So I turned around to them and I said, I want to be taken out of the country. And they said, okay, we can do that. And so next thing, we went on a ferry and we drove through France, and we ended up in a gorgeous hotel in a place called Pont du Gard. And we stayed there, and the first story went out and they called it on the front pages. I was really scared to see it, and they brought it to my room, which was a beautiful room in the south of France. And there was me on the front page of the Sunday People saying, I am Brady's daughter. Yeah, I know.
No.
And
are you okay to turn your phone notifications
that's not
off?
me, is it?
Yeah.
I thought
And if you're watching this, then all of the links for Chris are in the description box below this video. If you want to check out her literary work. And by the end of this podcast, we will also have the social media links for her and any contact links that she gives us as well. So please go down and support Chris's work. So you're in France?
Yeah, so we're in France, and he brought this newspaper in, and there was me with the red lipstick on and these earrings, pearl earrings, and looking like I didn't ever look. And with the headline, I am Brady's daughter. And it was, it was horrible. And Phil said, oh, but we had to write it like that. And I said, well, why would you write it like that? Because I, didn't think, it crossed my mind once in a kid's home. And he said, but that way it covers us. Because if we say, oh, you're Brady's daughter, and you turn out not to be, then we look bad. But this way, it can be, you've said it. So they were covered. I know, it's appalling. And again, because I was brought up to respect the middle classes, and that I'm middle class, and I'm working class, and anyone middle class, you do as they say and you respect them. So I just took it, really. And while I was there, I fell in love with Phil, probably because I was blown away. I'd only known working class men and, fairly rough men, and he was middle class and a writer and good looking. And I was really attracted to him, and we ended up sleeping together in the hotel. And it wasn't something seedy. He told me he was in love with me, and, I had feelings for him. And I saw him doing his journalist work, and I said that I wanted to be a journalist. And he said, well, when we go back to London, I'll teach you. And so when we were out there for 2 weeks, I think. And during that time, there was another story went out about me. This time it was a middle page. And I remember one night we were out having dinner in this gorgeous place called Egremont, and having oysters and wine, brandy. And I had seen in a newspaper something about Emma Ridley getting paid £10,000 for her story. And I thought, well, I've been on the front page. Now I'm on the middle page. And I said, don't I get paid though? Because I've done a story. Shouldn't I get paid? And Phil said, greedy people ask for money. Just be grateful you've got your side of things out. I know, it was pretty bad. And I came back, and I remember sitting on the ferry, and I saw Ted Hines as a friend. And, because it was like three of us, and we would link arms and walk across this bridge. And, we had a whale of a time, and we would swim. And it just seemed to me to be an awesome time with these two intelligent men who were writers, which I wanted to be. And I thought we were good friends. I suppose I thought it would never end. And then on the ferry going back, they seemed to change towards me. And it was like I wasn't there. And I started to feel really bad. And they said, oh, by the way, your parents have phoned you. We've got to pick up a bin bag with your stuff from your house. And I'm like, oh. And they said, oh, your boss contacted us. You're not allowed to go near the agency. So I was working for an agency worldwide at the time. And I'm like, oh, so there I was. I had absolutely like nothing. And I'd been all over the newspapers. And I said, well, where do I go? Literally, they picked up my bin bag with my stuff in. And I said, what do I do next? It was like but obviously this is where you go by, And I was like, what's the next procedure? What happens next? And Phil put me in a B&B in Earl's Court. And he came to see me a lot. We went out to dinner, and next thing, the guy in the B&B came in as a foreign guy, and he came in. He said, "You could earn a lot of money working for me." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You're like one of my girls." And I was pretty upset. And I said to Phil when he came that night, I think I've been asked to be a hooker. And he said, "Oh, we'll have to get you out of here." And he looked at me and he said, "God, isn't this weird?" He said, "There you were a private investigator. You had a good life. You had a boyfriend. You had a job. And now you've got none of those things. Your boyfriend doesn't want to speak to you again. You haven't got your job. Your parents have thrown you out. And here you're in this place and somebody's asking you to work on the street." He says, "So strange the way we've got all that power that we can just ruin people's lives just like that." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, I guess it is." And he did see me, every night. And then I got in contact with an old boyfriend of mine, Barney, and he said he had a house that he could let me live in. So I moved in there, kept seeing Phil. He would take me out to Joe Allen's and places. I started learning to be a journalist. I was worried about the story in the newspaper. A few people I'd seen had seen it and said, "That was really out of order. Didn't you know what he did?" And this kind of thing. And I felt quite upset. And I said to Phil, "I don't think I can live in this country anymore. I feel really ashamed of that story." And he said, "Well, where would you like to live?" I said, "Well, America." And he said, "Well, have you got any money?" And I said, "Well, about £300. He said, "Well, I could double that." He said, "If you go." And so he gave me £300. I had another 300, and I just got on a plane and went to New York and got there, walked up and down Times Square and looking around, and this guy stopped me in the street and said, "You lost?" And I said, "Yeah, I've just come to America to live, but I've got nowhere to go. I haven't got that much money." And he said, "If you can stay for one night somewhere, I'll come tomorrow and I'll get you a room." And so I stayed in a motel, and he came the next day, put my suitcase in the back of his car, drove to Brooklyn and got me a bedsit with a Italian woman called Bina. And I lived there for a while. Next thing, Phil rang me and said, "I'm doing another story on you." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Ian Brady has written to me." And I'm like, "Oh." And he said, "He remembers your mother and he thinks after all that you are his daughter." I know. So I said, "You know that's not true. That's not true." And he said, "We're still going to run it. And we're going to call it Brady Admits He's Her Dad." Dad. I mean, it's not the word you should use for him anyway. And
oh my God.
I know, it's pretty horrible. So I then moved to somewhere on Staten Island. I was doing bar jobs to get by, but it was pretty hard and it got cold, and I ended up in a really awful bedsit on Staten Island. There was a lot of old guys there, and I went to the local shops, and two guys in a car saw me and they said, "Are you a Brit?" And they had a baseball bat, and it was pretty scary where I was, and I was falling under, and I know what I was falling under. And I rang Phil, and Phil said, "Why didn't you journalize? I taught you, didn't I?" And I said, "Well, okay, I'll try and journalize." And I started trying to do it, and I got stories for him. I got one on some black racists who were going to come to England. I got another on Madonna losing her hair, and another on Howard Beach trial. So he sent me the odd £100 for these stories that were appearing in the Sunday People under his byline. And next thing he said, "Why don't you write to Brady?" And I said, well, I'd rather not. That was pretty, too much for me. And he said, well, that's what journalists do. And you've got an in there. Don't give it up. So I sent off a letter to Brady, said, I live in America now, blah, blah, blah. And through came this letter. And thereafter there was a weird dance between Brady giving me stories, like things that he wanted to get in the press. Like he believed that he was the father of, I suppose he took the ball and ran with it, with him being a father to everyone. He said that he was David Smith's eldest son's father. And of course, I repeated off the letter to Phil, and Phil was like, I'm going to run with that. So that kind of, I know, did he pay me? No, he didn't pay me. I was left at a point where I was thrown out of that bedsit, and I was standing in Times Square, and I rang the Sunday People news desk because that seemed like my kind of home. It was the only constant. And I got Ted Hines, and I was crying. I said, Ted, I've just got a cup of tea in my hand. I said, I've got nowhere to go. I said, I'm hungry and I'm cold. And he said, if I pay for your flight home, he said, you can come and stay with me, but only for a week. So I said, please, thank you. So he did. And I went to live with Ted Hines in his flat on Kew Gardens. And I would go up to the Sunday People wine bar opposite, hang out with the journalists. I got speaking to another journalist called Mydrum Jones. And then I hopped from Ted Hines to Mydrum Jones and moved in with him and carried on journalising and learning about journalism, through Mydrum. He taught me a lot. And then I thought to myself, well, these guys aren't that bright, they're nasty sometimes, the way they were hurting people. I didn't want to be nasty, but I thought what they're doing is easy. I can do it. I don't have to carry on being a private detective. So I applied to the News of the World as a private detective. And I said, Luke, can I work for you? And also the Daily Mail and the Sunday Mirror. And I got took up by all of them and started to become a private detective for the press. Phil Hall at that point, oddly, had become the overall editor of the News of the World. He was in Andy Coulson's position. So I ended up working underneath him, which was bizarre, really. That was when they started giving me a lot of work. I ended up earning six figures. I bumped into Ted Hines at a party, and he said, oh, Phil told me you're earning six figures from us. And I said, yeah, I am. And that went on for quite a while. And I ended up getting too much work. They were using me for nearly everything. It was like they hadn't had a private investigator to work for them. And I became very good with... So I'd always had a sixth sense. I've always been a bit psychic as a kid. Like most kids that are abused, they ended up sort of not being in the world. They withdraw a bit. So they end up having like sixth sense. I think that's common. So I had that. And I remember like knowing what to say to people to get them to talk and who to pinpoint. And I'd always been good at that at detective agencies. So the News of the World really used that skill a lot. And Greg used to come around. I ended up moving into a flat next to the News of the World. And Greg would come around, the news editor would come around my flat and say, I've got this story, I've got that story. How do we get into this? How do we get into that? So I ended up like working from about 8 a.m. to 9 p.m, just working, like really solid. And it got too much for me. There was one day where this went on for about 5-6 years. And it got too much for me. One day I'd been working out the flat I was in, had a gym, I was lifting weights, and I came upstairs and Greg rang. I picked up the phone and it was about the Yorkshire Ripper's wife, and she was remarrying. And he said to me, Chris, find out the name of the guy, find out where she is right now. I think she's in a hairdresser's. Get along at the hairdresser's, get next to her, get your hair done, and find out the name of the guy. Do it now. And I'd just been working out, so my heart was beating from the workout. And when he went, do it now, I went like that. My heart went, and I blacked out on the floor. And so it was a ported building. And I came to, rang the porter, Alan, and I said, "Oh, Alan, I'm having a heart attack, and call an ambulance." So he called an ambulance, and I got taken in the ambulance to the local hospital. And I rang my mother and said, I've had a heart attack. And I was laying on a stretcher with all those things on my chest. And I felt really bad, actually. I felt really sick. And the next thing, Greg Miskew, the News of the World news editor, poked his little face through the curtains. And he was the last person I wanted to see. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "What about the Ripper's wife?" And there I am, laying with these things strapped on. And I said, "I've had a heart attack." And he said, "You haven't had a heart attack." He said, "Stop over exaggerating. You've had a panic attack. I've already spoke to the doctor." I couldn't believe it that he came and interfered. And it turned out it was a panic attack. It was a serious one. But I really didn't want to go with him. I think my mother must have told him, or the porter. He took me to a pub and I said, "I don't want to do this." I never really wanted to be a private detective anyway. And I would rather do the in-depth stories, the in-depth writing, and I want to write books. And he said, "What could you write about?" He said, "That is a really hard business and only a few people earn money out of it. Stay doing what you're doing." And I said, I can't do it. I said, I don't think I'm very well. And he said, "No, get home." He said, "Have a cup of tea and get on with the Ripper job." And so I did. I went home, but I was just really worried about having a heart attack. So I said to Greg, "I know a guy. He works for all the ex-MI6 guys in London." I'd worked at his office just for a while. I dated him for a while. He was ex-Eton schoolboy, very rich, really powerful, and he had a stable of girls that would do stuff. And I said, "Greg, why don't I introduce you to a man I know, John Boy? He's got a stable of girls. You can give them all the work." And I arrogantly at that time thought that because I had this sixth sense and he rang me for everything, that nobody would ever usurp me, stupidly. And I arranged for them to go out to dinner together. We went to a restaurant in Piccadilly, and I had been rung by him every day, 8 a.m. would get a phone call through to 9 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. And from that day when I introduced them, my phone stopped ringing.
Oh.
And it stopped ringing from every newspaper, Sunday Mirror, not the Daily Mail, the Sunday Mirror. I was completely finished. And I found out later, John brought them. I didn't know that he was doing it. He brought them the phone hacking and the cyber crime.
So they had you spying on celebrities?
Yeah, they did.
How did that work, and which celebrities did you spy on?
Well, quite a few. Elton John, Paul McCartney, Liz Hurley, Heather Mills. We spied on everybody.
What's the procedure to spy on them?
Well, mostly they used the SAS, and they were using serving guys. There was an outfit of private investigators that Neville Thelbach used to run, and he put me with them, and they were nice guys. There's a guy called Rab, and they used to go shooting at Bisley. I went along with them, and I soon found out that Greg Miskew didn't like Rab, and he didn't like his boys. He said they were greedy, and he said they were leaking stories that they were working on. And he then set up these parties and told Rab and his boys, "Oh, why don't you bring the serving boys? Bring them all. Because the News of the World has really lavish parties." And so most of these SAS guys came along, and Greg would slip them his business card and get them to work for him, basically to do surveillance. So what happened at that point, I was contacted by a company who said they were a computer company. I still have my advert in the Yellow Pages, private detective. They rang me, said, "Oh, we need a surveillance doing. We're a computer company. We're based along Buckingham Gate." And I said, "Okay, what do you need doing? A surveillance." So I brought with me an ex-army guy called Martin, went along, told me what they needed doing, a surveillance on somebody, and they said 6 agencies had failed with it. And I thought, okay, Martin and I did the job. We chased this guy around Buckingham Palace with walkie-talkies. He jumped on a bus. I decided to give up because I thought he was surveillance aware. Eventually, I managed to track the guy where he was, went back, and I was sitting at this desk, a bit like this one, maybe longer. And I went back on my own, and all of a sudden, all these guys came in and sat around. There was about 7 guys, and this guy Andrew introduced me. He said, "This is anti-terrorist. This is MI6. This is," and I thought, "Whoa, what are all these guys doing?" And he says, "I suppose you know who we are." Actually, I didn't know, but Martin had said as we'd left the following week, they're MI6, and I said, "No, I don't think they are." And he said, "Of course they are. Look where they are." And I said, "No, they're just a computer company." Actually, he was right. They were called CIEX Limited, which is Company X. The C means company and X is X. Company X, run by Michael Oatley, who is a famous MI6 officer who met with the IRA during the Thatcher years. And they sat down and they didn't want to know about the surveillance. They didn't care. They said, "How are you with the News of the World?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I work for the News of the World. You've checked that out, fine." And I was wondering why they were so these heavy rollers. And they said to me, "How much access do the News of the World have to the boys at Hereford?" And I burst out laughing. I said, "Constant access. You know, they use them all the time, probably more than the government does." And he went really red and he said, "Why is that so amusing?" And I said, "Well, you know, so I suppose it's not that amusing." I did find it amusing. They were absolutely livid. They were really livid. They said, "What else are the News of the World up to?" So I filled them in on what the News of the World were up to. And I don't know if that was linked with Boyle. Boyle certainly worked for CIX at one point, and I don't know if that is why the News of the World were bought phone hacking. But Greg took it up, and so did Phil Hall, and they pushed me out. I had been working from the office, and Phil said to Greg, "I want Christine to go. I don't want her from the office." He said to still give me work, but let her work from home. But as soon as I was out, I didn't get any more work unless they got stuck on difficult stuff. And so I was feeling pretty bad about that. And I went off then to focus on the real IRA because I had become interested in that through going over to Belfast. So I went off to Belfast to live out there and came back, spent a year or so out there, came back and said to Greg, "I want my work back as a private investigator." He said, "Oh, we don't do that anymore. We're really high tech and we do stuff with phones, pinging phones." And I went home and I thought, well, that's really odd because that's illegal. And I wonder who in the investigations world is doing that. So I thought, I'll ask John. So I rang John and I said, "Are you doing phone stuff for the News of the World?" And he said, "No, they pushed me out and they ran up a bill with me for $250,000. And then they told me to get lost." And he said, "I had to blackmail Andy Coulson that if you don't pay my $250,000, then I'm going to tell every politician that, you've been, what I've done to spy on them." And when I was having dinner with Greg, I noticed he was on the phone to someone called Glyn constantly. So I said to John, "Who is this person that's doing this phone stuff? Because it's illegal." And he said, "Who do you think it is?" And I said, "Well, Glyn." I heard the name Glyn. He said, "You're kidding me." He said, "That was my office boy." It was his office boy that he'd trained, and what the News of the World decided to do, that John was too expensive, so they would poach his office boy and bring him in, give him a contract. And this office boy didn't know anything about security, anything about not hacking the royal family, anything to do with that. And that is why the phone hacking started. But interestingly, when they all got arrested, and I think probably that it was John Boyle that pulled the plug because he was really angry they'd been pushed out. Nick Davis from The Guardian knew about John, and he came to me and he wanted to find out every coffin spit about John. I wouldn't tell him, but he went off and said, "Look, I found out about cocaine parties, about houses in London, about MPs." And I said, "Fine, you write it. I'm not going to speak about him." And then when his book came out, Hack Attack, John wasn't mentioned it at all.
So you mentioned the IRA then. Did that have a danger? researching this stuff and meeting the different groups?
Yeah, well, I was sent out by the News of the World to do something on the UDA. The UDA were having interscene battles. They were shooting each other, and Greg Miskiw sent me out and said, find out what's going on. Why are they killing each other? So I went there, found out the story, came back. He put it in the paper. He didn't put my name on it. I felt quite ambitious to become a defence reporter. So I started going out there and forging contacts. And I made a contact with an INLA officer, and the INLA officer introduced me to someone in the Real IRA. And the Real IRA, the Omar bomb had just, that had just happened. The Real IRA had come to London on a recruitment drive. I had gone along there, met them, came back, decided to go to Crossmaglen and, meet up with them. I had the idea of writing a book on the Real IRA that was going around my head. And I just managed to get closer and closer to the Real IRA. And I ended up, when Phil pushed me out, I thought, what am I doing now? I felt like completely lost. And I thought, I know, I'll go there. So I went to Belfast, started working for the Sunday Times, and just started to cozy up to one of their commanders, and ended up having a relationship with the second in command of the Real IRA, just to get stories.
Oh my goodness.
I know it might sound horrible, but when you've been pushed out of somewhere and being part of the News of the World, you're part of it's almost like a cult, and you feel kind of that you can't cope without.
Did you not think that getting stories about the IRA may end up with you getting executed by them?
Well, when I mentioned in my book, I talked about the relationship I had with the second in command, and they rang me, called me some names, and said, don't ever come back to Ireland. So I haven't actually been back.
But then you get involved with ISIS and recruiting young Muslims to go undercover in mosques. This sounds equally dangerous.
Well, what happened, because my stories were so good they would be good because, if you're around someone's house in Dundalk, they trust you. So they built up trust. So I was getting comms given to me from the prison in Portlaoise, where all the Michael McKevitt was there at that time, I think. And so I was getting comms that they're like toilet paper, it's really thin, and then they undo it. And I was getting stuff about them having a split in the Real IRA. So the Sunday Times noticed. And then Liam Clark took me under his wing. Then I started doing stories on the UDA and John White. And John White, who's friends with Johnny Adair, we did a few stories together. And then he murdered John Gregg. And then he had to flee Belfast. And he gave me an exclusive. He rang me. I was in a nightclub in Belfast, and it was 1 a.m. He said, Christine, I'm just speak to you. And so I got an exclusive, which went on the cover of the Sunday Times. And I met up with Alex Marinchek from the News of the World when I came back to London just for a weekend. And he was in the Rizzoli bar at the Ritz. And before I went along, there was another guy called John Ross, and he said, he's with the CIA. Watch what you say. And I said, well, why would I watch what I say? I haven't got anything to hide. And so there was an old guy there, seemed pretty interesting. And Alex kept saying, because Alex was in charge of Belfast at that time for the News of the World, he said, Christine's really good at cozying up to terrorists. And, he was laughing about it, whatever. And this guy said to me, where do you see yourself? And I said, doing something more than this. It's quite, it's not really making up stories for the News of the World, pushing. I got to the point where I was going to either the UDA and the Real IRA and saying, make up a story this week. I haven't got anything, say something exciting. And they were coming around my house at 2 a.m. and things like that. And it got to a point where I started to feel a bit paranoid, because I thought, well, hang on, these are guys on different sides. And then one of the UDA guys said to me, you do know the Real IRA are watching you, don't you? And I said, well, no. He said, yeah, they sat outside your house because they're wondering, well, hell you are. So I just left. I thought, now's the time to leave, really. And as soon as I got back to London, Alex said to me, oh, that CIA officer was quite interested in you. So I said, well, that's great. And then this American lawyer contacted me and said he wanted me to do some work on a divorce case. He had offices in Park Lane. And when I went there, he wasn't really interested in me doing anything on his divorce. He wanted to know what I thought of Muslims, actually. And, was I racist? Was my political views left or right? And he used some quite aggressive words about black people, and just to see how I reacted. And then he said, we want you to recruit young Muslims in this country and put them undercover in mosques and run them for us. How do you feel about doing that? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. I can do it. I'll think about it. And he gave me loads of books on Bin Laden and ISIS. There was quite a few, and he said, go away and read them. And that was it. I didn't hear anything more from them. So nothing. But the phone hacking was raging, I think, around that time. And I think that's when I went back to see Brady again. I'm trying to think of a...
Is this the visit where he lunges at you?
Yeah.
Can you describe what happens there then?
Well, I was writing to Colin Wilson because Ray and I'd got back with Ray again, and Ray and I went down to see Colin Wilson. We were fascinated by his work on Outsiders, and he recognised me, Colin Wilson, from the paper. So I'd gone round, met his wife, and, as a fan, came away and stayed in a B&B and was just grateful that I'd been in Colin Wilson's house. And the hotel manager rang me and said, Colin Wilson's a reception for you. And I was like completely starstruck. And he said, I've seen you in the paper. You're Ian Brady's daughter. And I'm like, oh, come on. He said, yeah, I know. I'm just joking. And I told him my story, and he said, look, I'll help you write your life story. You should get it written down. So I started to write my life story. I introduced, no, I didn't, not at that point. He wanted to write to Brady. He said, why did you stop writing to him? So for some reason, I said, well, I'll write to him and say, that you're a good chap, whatever. But I haven't spoken to Brady in a long, long time. He's Brady is really boring. His letters would be full of politics and what he thought of this country, what he thought of the president of the United States. And, it's not really my thing. And I resented that someone who had killed children didn't talk about that, and didn't have shame around that, and rather saw themselves as a politico or something. It seemed like it was irritating. He's massive hubris. And I noticed about him that he seemed to have different personalities, that the Politico one, that he saw himself as that actor in House of Cards. I can't remember the guy's name. He was obsessed with the guy, Ian Richardson, I think. He was obsessed that he looked like Ian Richardson, and Ian Richardson was based on him, which was crazy because he's a politician. And then he had a personality which was like a bit like a child, and then he had another personality which was completely mad, that used to write things like, do you ever hear that Sex Pistols song, My Way? And the Sex Pistols have got a picture of him, and they have the song, Just to Think I Killed Those Kids, but I Did It My Way. And he said, I love that song, and it really makes me laugh, and I have no regrets for what I did. I just did what I wanted, and I don't have any regrets. And he said that he had offered sacrifices to this being that had appeared to him, and that these beings were part of a group, and that after death he would be in credit, that now, he had done these murders, and he called them happenings, and he had done these happenings, and that he was in credit now in the afterlife. It's completely mad. And so I said, write to Colin. Colin, would maybe write a book on you. And he wrote back, how how dare you, Colin Wilson, third rate, whatever, and all this kind of stuff. And then he added on the end, you can come to see me if you like. And I thought, well, I just thought that I didn't really want to, but I thought, should I, as a journalist now? And I spoke to Greg Miskew about it, and he said, yeah, of course. Greg had become a personal friend, and he said, of course, go. Why wouldn't you go? And he said, go, and, we'll do a spread. So I wrote back to Brady and said, yeah, I'll come, but you do know I'm a journalist now. And he wrote back and said, yeah, I know you're working for the whopping scum, because I keep tabs on you, and look over your shoulder because I'm watching you all the time. It's quite rubbish. And so I said, well, okay, I'll come visit, but it will be an interview. And he then wrote back, and I think knowing that Greg Miskew was also going to be reading the letter, he said, have you seen the Hannibal Lecter films? It's based on me, and my visits now are unsupervised. My psychiatrist, Dr. Strickland, has made it that my visits will be totally unsupervised. And so you'll be sitting alone with me. I still have the letter. You'll be sitting alone with me. How does that make you feel? ? Are you afraid I might bite you? And bite was underlined twice. And I took it to Miskew, and he was like, oh, this is fantastic. Lovely. We'll have that for a spread. Oh, you're afraid. And a picture of Lecter and a picture of him. And I thought, it's LARPing, because obviously he's not. He's a child killer. Well, any murder of anybody is horrific, but he's not this, he's like a very crazy individual, completely shattered into different parts. And so I went along, and it was, as they said, I was alone with him. And again, I was late. I am a bit of a latecomer. I got on the train. Visiting hours ended at 4. It got to 4 o'clock. I was still on the train to Liverpool from London. And I rang his psychiatrist, Peter Strickland, and I said, look, I'm set to do this. I called it an interview. I'm set to do this interview. And it's 4 o'clock. This train's been broken down, but I'm sort of nearly there. I could probably get to you for like 5:30. And he said, yeah, oh, Chris, yeah, of course, you can come. And he's like, this really, I think, must be hippy dippy dude. And it was a sort of sound of like, I caught a sort of amusement in his voice, And I thought, what am I, some kind of experiment that I'm a woman and, I'm going to be alone with him. And I was young at the time. I was 29, I think, back then. And so I got there, and I got there late, and it was dark outside, and we sat in the room. There wasn't much lighting in the room, and there was like a kind of, it wasn't bright like I normally sat with him. And he sat there, and he had a list, and he went through this list about things he needed to tell me that the press needed to know about him. And it went on, and it was rather boring. And I was sitting there very bored. I think I made some notes. He then said, it then got pretty late, and I think it got to about 8 o'clock, and there was nobody coming. And I thought, what am I sat here with this guy talking, and nobody's going to come in and break it up? And it was just the numbingness and the fact I had to pretend to be interested in what he was saying. Because the only interesting thing about Brady is he did those atrocities. Yeah. Other than that, he's completely boring. And he suddenly got up and said, oh, it's my medication time. I'll be back in a sec. And so he went out, came back, and looked really zonked. He looked like somebody who had downed a bottle of whiskey, and he was kind of swaying like this. And I thought, oh my God, is he going to start saying weird things, right? And a nurse came in and said, oh, wrap it up. And I thought, oh, praise the Lord, it's the end. And so I stood up and said, oh, it's so late. And he stood up And I kind of felt a bit kind of sad. And I went, oh, goodbye, like you do to a mental patient. And he kind of grabbed me and lunged his tongue at my mouth and licked my face. I know, it was pretty horrible. Next thing, the nurse came back, and I swear she saw, she didn't see, but she saw, and I swear she laughed. And I said, excuse me, can I go to the bathroom, please? I didn't want her to leave me. And she took me out. I went in the bathroom, washed my face, came out, and was starting to feel a little bit spaced out. And I thought, oh, I want to get out of here. But I came out and there was nobody around apart from this little short little guy with a bald head who was walking around making weird noises. And I thought, this is scaring me. And it wasn't Brady I was scared of. It was the guy, because he just seemed like at any moment he might sort of really flip out, And there I was. They'd gone again and just left me. And there was no one else around, no staff. And I stood there and waited, and I thought, I can't handle this. I'm really scared of that guy, that he's going to come and punch me. So I walked down to Brady's room, knocked on the door, no answer, pushed inside. He was sitting on the bed. I said, I can't get out of here. And he was just ramrod straight, looking really disturbed. And he picked up a postcard, a picture of a deer, started going on about how he didn't deserve to be in prison, how it's not right, and stuff about how he's dead. Look, I'm in a coffin, I'm dead. And I said, I just need to get out. And next thing, a nurse came towards me, and she had that laughing almost. She goes, oh, are you still here? And I thought, yeah, I am still here with a child killer. It doesn't seem right. And then sometimes I've recounted the story to other journalists in America, and they're like, oh, well, we don't leave our serial killers alone with women. And it's like they almost don't believe it. And, I spoke to other people in this country who said, you should sue Park Lane for what went on, because not just leaving me in there, and I was scared of that other inmate, but the fact that Brady lunged at me. Now, had there been someone else there, I think they would have said, look, he's gone for his medication, he's going to be out of it, because I think he was. Without that medication, he wouldn't have done that for sure. And so I shouldn't have been left there with a patient who'd just gotten a liquid cosh. Not right at all. And I'm still considering suing them. So I left and felt really bad, the next day. And I rang up a woman that I'd been seeing over my sexual abuse. She was a hypnotist and trying to access memories of my father and I in Dublin, the sexual abuse memories. I had some of them, but there was bigger ones that I wanted access to. And she was working on me, hypnotizing me to access them and get them out. And I went straight to her house after I came back from Liverpool, told her about it, what had gone on. And I said, I feel really weird. And she said, well, you're in shock. And I said, but why? It's just like some nutter. She said, it's because of what he did. And his crimes, it was almost like he poured them inside me. I started having visions of the crimes. I started seeing a boy being axed up, which is the last murder of Edward Evans. It was absolutely horrific. And I thought, I can't go on like this. So I looked, came across this book about primal therapy that helps people that have been sexually abused. And, I thought, what am I doing with my life? Why did I go and leave myself privy to that? It was stupid. And I'm tired of being stupid. I'm tired of just being flopping around Fleet Street, not really having an identity. I would have relationships with men that would be sexual at the start, but then I would freeze up and start having memories of incest and think, oh, I can't do this. Feels like incest. And so I went off to America to do this therapy in Los Angeles, primal therapy in Los Angeles. And then when I was there, I'd only had a certain amount of money, £5,000 I went with. They take £5,000 off you as soon as you walk through the door. It was a therapy that John Lennon has done. And Ted Bundy has applied applied to do before he died. He wanted to have primal therapy, and it's basically they bust down your defenses and then they let the emotions come up and then they deal with them, and it's pretty rough. It's rough. So I started to do that. The £5,000 was taken off me. They then said, we need another £10,000 from you. And I said, well, I haven't got that kind of money. And they said, you really need our help because you're completely lost. And I thought it was a cult. It seemed like a cult. And I think I was probably, missing the newspapers and feeling like, because, I didn't, I felt pretty cast out. And so I phoned a journalist friend of mine, and she worked for the Sunday Express, and she said, look, we can pay that 10 grand straight to the primal therapy clinic, get you the help you need to get rid of your child sexual abuse, become a normal person. And all you have to do is do an interview about, what Brady's like, and, hand over the letters or whatever. So it didn't matter because Greg Miskiw had seen them and they were journalistic, blah, blah, blah. So I sent them all over, and she said, that's fine, we'll do that. And I said, I haven't got anywhere to live right now. Will you put me in a hotel? So they put me in the St. James, which is Rod Stewart's hotel, which is really nice. I met Rod Stewart, and they were filming Strange Days. Ray Fiennes also met him, filming Strange Days. And there was a guy sent along to mind me while the story was going through for the Sunday Express. And I was crying all the time. I was out by the pool. I was crying. And he said, why are you crying? Here you are. You're in LA. You're a nice looking girl. And, you're a good journalist. You're doing this weird therapy, but I'm sure you'll go back to London at the end of the day. Why are you crying every day? And I said something, and it was on the Saturday, and I knew that the Sunday Express had already gone to bed. So I thought, well, I can speak freely to him now. And I said, when I was with Brady, he shoved his tongue down my throat. And ever since then, I've been having like these weird hallucinations about his crimes. It was like he's poured something inside me. And he went, oh, that's terrible. I said, yeah. And he said, would you say it was like sexual abuse? And actually, it wasn't really sexual abuse. It was someone on a liquid cosh, who had just launched themselves at somebody because I suppose it was something to do. It didn't feel sexual or anything. So I said, well, not really, maybe. He said, well, you seem pretty upset. He said, it's like someone that's been sexually abused. And I'm like, yeah, maybe it was sexual abuse. Anyway, the following day, he had made that front page that he had sexually abused me. So I felt rather guilty towards Brady that he was this patient in a mental hospital that I had now accused of sexual abuse, which wasn't true. And it made me feel bad because I was a victim of sexual abuse to say this. Brady fought it. The Sunday Express went to court, went before a judge. The judge said, I am not going to say that it is slander towards a man like Brady to say he sexually abused someone. So he threw the case out. His lawyer went running outside and said to the waiting journalists, the Indie and the Times were there, and said, oh, Brady's won. And the Independent went with that. It's still online, and said, case got chucked out, Brady won. But they didn't, you see, because it wasn't proven in the Sunday Express. So they had to put an apology to the Sunday Express. And what annoys me is that's not online. So you just get the one story, but not online. So I decided to write my whole life story in the book, Searching for Daddy. And I put what happened in the book. And I wrote to Brady. I said, I've written a book about you. I've written what went on because that really disturbed me. And I'm sorry about that. And it's not sexual abuse. I disagree with what the Sunday Express did, but it made me feel pretty bad. You know what you've done. You shouldn't have done that to me. But I do agree that you were probably on liquid cosh. He didn't say anything to me in return. The book went out with Hodder and Stoughton. Next thing, Hodder and Stoughton legal department said, we got a letter from Brady. And he had cut out the Independent where it said he'd won. And he said, take that book off the shelves and I want compensation. Look, it's been proven in court. And I merely said to Hodder and Stoughton legal, get the next day's copy of the Indie where they say sorry. So they got that, cut it out, went back to Brady, get lost, matey, which he did. And the only thing I heard of him after that was in the Sunday Times when he was trying to kill himself, and I did a BBC World Service interview about evil, and he said that he has never met anyone he's hated in his whole life, but for Christine Hart, he'll make the exception that he really hates me and I'm the most despicable person ever.
So the next killer you interacted with was the Hillside Strangler? Is that correct? How did that come about?
Well, I had written the book and I got into the truth community a little bit, and a woman had approached me after reading my book and said, did you know that you're a monarch, mind-controlled slave, an asset for the Jesuits? And because she was American, not being mean about Americans, I love Americans, but they somehow think wacky things, and I'm English and we don't think that. And I thought, there's no such thing as that. So I typed back to her, and she was a really nice little pretty picture. And I said, I don't really believe in that kind of thing, but thank you. And she said, no, you need to look at your life. You know, you came from a Jesuit-run orphanage and you've spied on the IRA. You've gone near these men that are also monarch slaves. And you realize that they're like you, and that's why you went to see them. And I thought, well, that's kind of quite interesting, because I always did wonder why, I'd gone to see them. And she said, think about that you have a part of you that is an altar, because these monarch butterflies, they have an altar, and it's the altar that goes and does the spying and stuff. And I suddenly remembered that one time when I was in Dundalk with I won't say his name, the Real IRA commander I was having the relationship with, that he turned around and said to me, because I started getting paranoid, and I said, I want to go home. I feel really scared. And he said, why do you feel scared? You've just been lying with me on the riverbank. And I'm like, I just feel paranoid all of a sudden. And he said, do you know what you seem to me? You're two different people. He said, one is really boring, pathetic, and it's the one in front of me. And the other one is really exciting and devil may care. And the woman that was talking to me about that made me think of that day and made me think, have I got an altar? And the more I thought about it, and the more I thought of, sometimes when I was sitting with Brady, I would feel like, what the hell am I doing here? And the other times it would be, I want to find out, what he did. And when I was with the Real IRA, it was always wanting to burrow in really close. And it was going to Dundalk, which is an area where it's a no-go area for the British Army. But I just, I thought that I didn't go along with it, really. I said, it's interesting. And I was in a little Facebook group about it and, kept a little eye. And then one time a girl in the Facebook group said to me, do you remember your sexual abuse? And I said, I remember some, but there's times when I was in bed with my father when I was 7 in Dublin where I don't remember the actual act, but I remember waking up and feeling like a part of me was like gone, and I was almost like as if it had been cut out. And she said, and I said, I want to get to the one certain night where I woke up and felt that way. And she said, well, what's there? And I said, it's like a block. And she said, is it a screen? And I said, it is a screen. That's so clever. And she said, what's it got on the screen? And I said, well, it's got Disneyland pictures, Donald Duck. She said, you've been a victim of Disney mind control. And I remember being taken to Disneyland. So I started then to investigate a little bit more, but it's such a woo kind of world, it's mixed with the occult. You have to study black shamanism and, people that have become these monarch assets, they do have a side of them that is psychic. And I've always had that psychic side. And I started to think, things I'd done, like the commander, the Real IRA that I dated, next thing he was arrested and put in prison for a long, long time. And then looking back at the News of the World, I noticed that they had crashed as well and they were destroyed and I had a part in that. So I started to feel like I was probably either a destructive person or I was playing some kind of role that I wasn't getting anything out of. And so I did suspect it. And one night I was watching the TV and I saw Bianchi. Bianchi is a Hillside Strangler. And they were saying that he had an alter personality. And this alter was called Steve. And Brady, who I contacted about it. Chris Brady, we got talking. I said, I'm a journalist, whatever. We got on straight away, laughing, and he's pretty funny. And I said, I think Bianchi's alter is real. And he said, no. He's just joshing. It was like, to find an excuse. But I said, no. I said, you watch, and it's on YouTube, you watch him confessing in the cell where he's being Steve, and he goes through pictures of the girls that he killed. And he's like, I did that one, Angelo did that one, I did that one, he did that one, I did that one, Angelo. And it's like a kind of it's different to the man in court. It's like the energy, and I could feel it because of my sixth sense. And I got in contact with his doctor at the time, the prison doctor, Ralph Allison. And I said, will you send me his medical records? And he said, sure. So he sent over the whole file. And I went through the transcripts of Steve speaking in interview. And it was this disembodied boy. And it reminded me of Brady had that kind of thing going on as well, that altar. And I was absolutely fascinating. So I wrote to Bianchi, and Chris told me not to. He said, you won't get a reply, don't bother. But I always find it easy to somehow get a response from men like that. I suppose because I'm not mature, I'm quite childish, and I maybe speak to them in that kind of language. I got a reply straight away, and Chris was surprised. And I think it was the second letter. He said, come and see me in Walla Walla. And Chris was funny. I rang Chris and said, he's invited me to see him. And he goes, oh my God. He said, how will you sit opposite him? He said, you won't do it. He said, first of all, as well, you've got to sit on a plane for 24 hours. Then you've got to get off. And if that isn't bad enough, then you've got to get on a little plane and fly into mountains. He said, if that isn't enough, if you haven't vomited at that point, you'll vomit when you go into the airport because it's really painted weird colours. I was creased up laughing. He said, then you've got to sit opposite that son of a bastard and look deep into his eyes. He said, you just won't do it. And I'm like, I want to, again, there was nothing going on in my life. And I thought, I'll get a book out of this, and I'll write about this monarch mind control. I'll write about not realizing that nobody believes in monarch mind control. So I spent 3 years getting close to Bianchi, trying to access Steve, trying to trigger him so Steve would come out, and writing it in a book. Total waste of time. In For the Kill got published. It bombed. Nobody's interested in that. Nobody's interested.
What had he done?
Pardon?
What Bianchi done?
Bianchi, Bianchi had done, again with Brady, I felt that there was a personality that was like a Nazi. It was like an old Nazi, like Mengele. I felt that. And when I eventually ended up sitting opposite Mr. Bianchi, invited me on Valentine's Day. I didn't have the money. It cost $1,000 to get out there. I didn't have that money floating around, but I didn't want to waste it either. So I got a commission from Merope Mills, the Guardian magazine. They were going to call it Valentine's Day with Hillside Strangler. And so went out there. I wrote the first part, 3,000 words. They said, we want another 3,000 words after you've met him. And so they paid, and I went in to see him. He came out to see me. I was quite scared going in because as I went in, I started talking to a woman called Phyllis, and she said, oh, they know who you are, dear. You're going to get away with wearing different colours because they're very strict. And I'd gotten away with a skirt or something. And she said, that's because of who you are. They wheeled out the red carpet for you. And I said, oh, do you know I'm a journalist? She goes, the whole prison knows. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she said, oh, you'll find Ken really nice. He's a real ladies' man. And I thought that odd because he had injected bleach into women. He'd tortured them. He'd done the same as Brady, but on women. He'd gassed them. He'd done this, like Brady had said he'd done, like an experimental thing. Oh, I will see how long you can handle this. And then, oh, you've died. And it's almost like the Nazi Joseph Mengele, the kind of things. And they have that same scent. So there I was sitting there feeling unhappy. It was a big prison visitor room. It wasn't alone with him. They're different in America. They have more respect, I think, for people. They were armed up, the guards. There were 20 guards in the room for Bianchi. I was sitting there. Phyllis, the other woman visiting her husband, had told me a story about how one of the guys had come out with a knife the week before. So I felt that I wanted to go. I started to feel, I pushed myself too far. And suddenly the doors opened, and there was, my little table was opposite a table of 3 with the prison guards, quite near to them, I suppose. And all the prisoners came out wearing beige, and one came swaggering up to me, looking like Robert De Niro in The King of Comedy, with that kind of attitude, like, here I am and I'm super famous. And he just stood there like this. And I'm like, oh, stood up, shook hands. He sat down.
Wasn't he like chained up or anything?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
Yeah, we were sitting knees touching. I had this idea in mind that, you know, when I was out in New York, I'd been to spiritualist churches and done the psychic thing where you hold people's things and you psychically read them. I do that now for a living. And I wanted to touch his watch or a pen or glasses to try and read him. So they'd taken my bracelet off to get through the metal detectors. So the first thing I did was, oh, can you put my bracelet on? So he put the bracelet on. And as I did, I was trying to read his aura, and I couldn't get anything. And he then had these glasses. He took them off. He went to get Coke from all these machines. And I picked up the glasses straight away. I was trying to psychometrize them. Again, couldn't get a reading. And I thought, I'm not picking up anything from him. He sat down. We started talking about not really much. We started talking about Chris Berry D, actually. And he said, so you're friends with D? And I said, well, no, I don't really know him. We just chatted. And he said, I'm going to take him down when I get hold of him. And I'm like, you know, I didn't really care. And I love Chris to bits, but, you know, I didn't really care that he was saying this. And he said, you do know what I mean, don't you? And I'm like, kill him, you mean? He said, yeah, I'm going to take him down. And I thought, oh, God, must we have this? I'm supposed to be scared. And, you know, he went on like this and talking a bit like a thug. And eventually he kind of calmed down. And I started to get a little bit paranoid. I noticed that his eyes were changing colour. They're blue. They're like a kind of a baby blue. And somebody said this about Ted Bundy, that his eyes go dark brown and then blue. And Bianchi's were going from blue, because I was looking deep into them to try and read his energy and find out why he had to torture women. And they went from blue to brown. And when they went to brown, I started to get really, like, it was a really weird feeling. It was almost like coldness went all the way through me, and I felt as if I wanted to pee myself or run or pass out, but I couldn't do any of those things. I just froze. I just completely froze. And it was like I suddenly realized that I wasn't top of the food chain, and whatever it was looking at me was non-human, but ate people. That was the feeling. It was horrible. It was like all these razor blades were coming at me all at once. And I thought, but I couldn't. I was frozen. And then suddenly he said to me, Chris, are you all right? And I looked at him and his eyes had gone back to blue, and it was him. So I kind of snapped out of the complete fear. But the rest of the visit didn't go very well. He was denying what he had done. You know, he sits there and he starts talking about the women that died, you know, the women that died. Well, no, it was girls that you murdered, basically. He's in total denial. And he puts on this little whispery little voice that you're supposed to believe that's just rubbish. And I was waiting for this Steve character to come out. I don't know whether it was Steve at the start when he was threatening Chris Berry D or not, but maybe I suppose that was the time when I did actually meet the killer, because it seemed non-human. But I had two days with him, 8 hours each day, long time. You have sandwiches in there, and you know it was pretty heavy going. And came back. And because I hadn't done what I wanted to do, I still wanted to access Steve, find out what was going on. I was studying this monarch mind control, and they said the entities were involved. So I wondered, did Steve have these entities? What were the entities? Was it ET? Was it demons? Was it jinn? What was going on? So I hadn't finished. And I said to Murray P. Mills, I haven't actually finished my investigation. And she was like looking at it on quite a shallow way, as if, well, you've been to see him now. And she wanted me to write that I was really scared of him. But because he was going to see it and I hadn't finished digging into him, I wanted to keep him on good terms. And I said, I'm not going to say I was scared of him, even though I actually was. So there ensued an argument, and she said, oh, we'll put it in reader's experience. And I said, well, I'm not a reader. I don't read The Guardian. And she put it in there without my permission. I had to go to the union. So now again, I know they say that the tabloids are really horrible and the broadsheets are nice, but they're just as ruthless. And it sits online now, and it makes me look like Little Red Riding Hood. This woman, went to see a serial killer, and I might see you next year. And it makes me look absolutely stupid. It makes them look stupid because it's just a rubbish story, but it sits online. And I said to her, take that down. It's been up long enough, but she still sits there, and it's incorrect and unfair. But this is what you're up against if you try to reveal that serial killers are actually like little puppets, and it's something else involved. I don't know what it is. I still haven't investigated. I still haven't dug. But there's a lot of people in the truth community that believe in these entities, reptilians, etc. I've met David Icke. We've talked about reptilians. I talked about my experience with Bianchi. Chris D had the same experience. I came home after meeting him, and I started to have a really weird reaction at home. I started to feel that there was someone watching me in the house that was invisible. Of course, I've got a sharp sixth sense, so I would pick up on that. But then I started to have really, really bad visions of men being tortured. And I thought, what the hell is going on here? And I rang Chris, and I thought, well, I'm not going to lead him by saying, oh, you're getting weird visions after meeting Bianchi, because that would be leading. And I really wanted to find out what was going on because it was scaring me. And so I said to him, well, Chris, answer me this. Did you notice anything spooky when you were dealing with Bianchi? And he said, oh, you mean the inhuman thing that gets inside your head and gives you horrible visions? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, I've experienced it. And I said, I've experienced it now. What am I supposed to do? And he said, well, I ran to the church. And so I drove straight there to a church I went to in Hayes. Said I need a meeting with a priest there, the parish priest. And I told him the story. And he gave me parts of the Bible to read. I think it was from John. And it stopped. I read them, it stopped.
So what about MK Ultra? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I after studying, those guys, and I think there was something gone on with them. I don't think it was them that organically went up and did those things. I think either there's entities involved in that, and the entities needed to feed on the victims. They say that these ET or jinn, demons, ET, whatever they are, they need to feed on fear and suffering. And these victims, these guys, certainly Brady and Bianchi, torture in that horrific way. And I don't think either of them know why they did it. They certainly posture, especially Brady. Bianchi sits in denial, but he sent me a load of poetry, and the poetry was gloating about what he did, his winter shattered mind where no one else can see. And he knows that he knows. But I don't think they know. So I don't think there's any point in going to serial killers and talking to them, because you just get the party line, because they don't know, you see. And so I think, I studied the Quran. I've studied Quran. I'm getting taught by an imam in Oman about the jinn. He casts out the jinn. He believes that there's a race of invisible beings of fire. I think biblically, we call them demons, and the truth movement call them reptilians and ET. But and a lot of the people in the truth movement think that, you know, the lockdown and what's going on now is because these ET have got control, and they're quoting films like Oblivion with Tom Cruise. Have you seen that? Where it's really good, actually. I watched it. And he thinks that there's been a battle for planet Earth, but humanity's won, but he's actually in with the aliens. It's really quite, it's creepy. And then there's another Netflix series, Colony, where again, aliens have taken over, but you never get to see them because they're just invisible. And a lot of the truth movement, some really quite intelligent people believe that these creatures that came into serial killers to feed are the ones that have got control right now. I mean, it's quite strange to think about it. If that's true, then we're pretty much in trouble.
Yeah, we've interviewed David Icke several times, and he talked about these shifting of the energy in the face of the killers and the eyes and all that kind of stuff. And I asked him about it, and he gave a very long explanation. But if anyone's watching this and wants to see that, we've got 2 3.5-hour podcasts on the True Crime Podcast playlist with David Icke. They're getting a lot of people viewing those right now, especially since he got kicked off a lot of the platforms, didn't he?
Yeah, we went to the Priory Hotel in Isle of Wight, and yeah, he's pretty cool. He was very interested in the phone hacking because he thought it was an MI6 jobby, and I'm like, well, yeah, it was. So we talked about that mostly.
So if people want to find you then, find your work and find you on social media, we're going to put all your links in the description box below this video. What social media are on, Chris?
Well, I do psychic readings now for people. I do, a lot of people have got attachments, these demonic attachments. I do casting out of them. I do checking to see if people have got them. So they can reach me on my website, ChristineJoannahart.com, or Facebook, Christine Hart on Facebook, Messenger. Yeah, I don't have books out at the moment. I've just written a book which is about all this, and it's I put it in novel form because publishers won't touch it otherwise. So that I'm trying to find a literary agent right now, or a publisher. So anybody out there who knows of one, I've got this 200,000 page book that I would like to be out there because I think it's important.
200,000 word book.
I know, 200 words. Sorry, 400 pages that I'd really like out there, you know, because it's my life work and I've worked really hard. And I think I've got something to share about what's going on right now, because I do think that that research into serial killers is relevant now with what's going on. I know it does sound creepy, but a lot of the Americans are coming out and saying that, you know, these beings, whatever they are, they've got control of us, and it's a war against humanity. I know it sounds completely crazy, but watch Oblivion, watch Netflix Colony, and then see what you think after.
Well, people are cracking up all over the world right now with these lockdowns. So you can see the change in the energy and the spiritual warfare. But
I think it's a good idea to start reading, the words of Christ. You know, if you're a Muslim, read the Quran. You know, get close to God. When I do psychic readings for people, a lot of the time, you know, there's people coming through, like relatives, and they're giving messages that it's going to be really bad the days ahead, and to keep close to God, because we're all going to find ourselves probably, the way things are going, getting there pretty quickly. I mean, but I think if you keep God close, keep Christ close, or Allah close, then you'll probably be okay. But I think that's where we have to cling right now.
So, absolutely amazing journey visiting serial killers with some spiritual life lessons at the end. And if you've enjoyed this, please let us know in the comments what you have thought. Huge thank you to Chris for coming on. Like I said, her links will be down there in the description box if you want to support her. What's the preferred method of people contacting you? I
like Facebook Messenger, but I think you have to send a friend request, and then so I guess through my website. Through my website as a contact form. So probably that's best.
I'm sure a fair few people will contact you. And huge thank you to people who've gone down in the description box and clicked on our playlist, donation links, and all our social links and all of our other stuff. And huge thank you to the new subscribers. Subscription logo is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So take care out there. Cheers from Guildford. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Well done. Brilliant.